She broke every rule. She wore miniskirts on a stage built for modesty. She sang about longing, loss, and love with a voice that trembled like truth itself. In an era when country music belonged to the men in cowboy hats, Jeannie Seely dared to show up in lace, eyeliner, and her full, unapologetic self. They called her Miss Country Soul, but behind that title was a woman who battled silence, illness, and a world that forgot to give her credit. And still, she kept singing. She didn't just leave a mark on country music. She became part of its heartbeat. This is the untold story of Jeannie Seely. Her name was Marilyn Jeannie Seely, but the world would come to know her as simply Jeannie. Born on July 6, 1940, in the modest town of Titusville, Pennsylvania, she carried the cadence of Appalachia in her voice and the quiet resilience of women raised by radios and prayers. From the earliest days, the airwaves called to her. As a teenager, she appeared on local radio stations, her voice cutting through static like a promise. It wasn't long before that promise took her to Los Angeles, where dreams either bloomed or burned. For Jeannie, they began to bloom. But it was Nashville, the capital of country music, that would become the stage where she planted her flag and her soul. In 1966, Jeannie Seely released Don't Touch Me, a song written by her then-husband, Hank Cochran. It wasn't just a hit, it was a statement. The lyrics, aching and intimate, spoke of boundaries, desire, and self-worth, rare themes for a female artist in a genre dominated by men. The song earned her a Grammy Award for Best Female Country Vocal Performance, making her one of the few women at the time to claim such a title. That same year, she became a regular voice on every jukebox, every radio program, and every tear-streaked night drive across America. But it wasn't just her voice that turned heads, it was her presence. At a time when the Grand Ole Opry clung to conservative traditions, where long skirts and high collars were expected, Jeannie stepped onto the stage in a miniskirt. To some, it was shocking. To others, it was electric. To Jeannie, it was just natural. They called her Miss Country Soul, a nickname that captured the emotional gravity she brought to every note. Her performances weren't just songs, they were confessions, catharses, sermons delivered in 3 chords. She had the uncanny ability to smile while singing of heartbreak, to stand tall while pouring out vulnerability. As her reputation grew, so did her reach. Jeannie wasn't just a singer, she was a songwriter, penning lyrics for others, and co-writing Anyone Who Knows What Love Is Will Understand, which later became a cultural staple, used in everything from film scores to the eerie soundtrack of Black Mirror. Her writing was raw, timeless, and emotionally surgical, and yet, her influence wasn't always heralded the way it should have been. She wasn't just a woman in country music. She was a woman changing country music, pushing boundaries, challenging norms, doing things her way in a genre that often preferred compliance over courage. In 1967, she became a member of the Grand Ole Opry, a distinction that should have cemented her place in the pantheon. And while it did earn her respect, she was never the center of attention, never the glossy cover girl of country's mainstream magazines. Instead, she became a workhorse, performing over 5,297 times on the Opry stage, more than any artist in its history. She brought laughter, too. Jeannie was known for her wit, clever, sharp, never mean. She could disarm a crowd with humor, then crush their hearts with a single verse. She was a television personality, a radio host, and a mentor to young artists trying to find their voices in a world still skeptical of female ambition. Publicly, she was radiant, confident, a figure of strength wrapped in sequins and sass. To fans, she was a fixture, always there, always warm. She aged in public with grace and without apology, never chasing youth, never needing to. She wore her years like medals, and her stage presence like armor. She received more than just applause. Her walls were lined with awards: Grammy, CMA Joe Talbot Award, 2023, honors from Billboard, Cashbox, Record World, and a star on the Music City Walk of Fame. She even received a Doctorate of Arts from Lincoln Memorial University, an acknowledgement of not just her music, but her legacy. But even with all the acclaim, Jeannie never seemed interested in stardom for its own sake. She didn't chase celebrity, she chased connection. And in doing so, she became something rare, an artist who never pretended to be anyone else. To the world, Jeannie Seely was a pioneer, a firecracker, a trailblazer wrapped in rhinestones. But what they didn't see, what the spotlight couldn't always capture, was the cost of remaining true to oneself in a world that preferred compromise. That part of the story was kept behind the curtain. And that's where we go next. Before the glitter, before the accolades, before the Grand Ole Opry and the Grammy, Jeannie Seely was just a girl from a steel town. Titusville, Pennsylvania, was no cradle of country music. It was a working-class community where dreams didn't fly. They labored. Her family lived humbly, her father a hard-working man, her mother nurturing but firm. In the gray mornings of northern Pennsylvania, Jeannie's voice was already a thing apart. It wasn't trained. It was felt. But there was a restlessness inside her, even as a child. A quiet sense that something else, somewhere else, was waiting. Music became that escape. Long before Nashville, she would press her ear to the family radio, listening to the echoes of Patsy Cline and Hank Williams as if they were calling her by name. In school, she was artistic, outspoken, a little rebellious. She wasn't afraid to speak up, a trait that didn't always sit well in the conservative confines of small-town life. Yet, no one saw the isolation behind her confidence. Being bold in a quiet town made her a target. Girls whispered, adults raised eyebrows, and still, she refused to shrink. Her first heartbreak wasn't a boy. It was the realization that authenticity comes at a cost. That speaking your mind as a woman, even with grace, could be seen as arrogance. That ambition wasn't charming, it was inconvenient, especially if you didn't apologize for it. At the age of 16, she began working at a local radio station. Not singing yet, just handling office duties. But every break, she would sneak into the studio, try out the mic, and imagine. That studio became her sanctuary, a place where her voice felt realer than the world outside. By 20, she had left Titusville, first to Los Angeles, then Nashville. But leaving home didn't mean leaving behind the wounds. In Los Angeles, she was just another pretty face, with a voice and a suitcase full of songs. She was broke. She was often dismissed. She sang backup, worked in publishing houses, sold demos for next to nothing. Some men promised to help her career, only to demand more than a thank you. She learned quickly how to smile without surrendering, how to protect herself in a world that viewed her ambition as flirtation. The music business, she discovered, was not built for women like her. Smart, sharp, unafraid. She watched as others got opportunities she earned. Watched her own lyrics sung by others without credit. She bit her tongue more times than she would ever admit. And then came Hank Cochran. He wasn't just a songwriter, he was a legend in the making. Their love was fast, intense, filled with both harmony and dissonance. They married in 1969, and for a while, it seemed like her life had found its melody, but it wouldn't last. Jeannie later spoke of how difficult it was to be married to someone whose talent was so revered, and whose ego could sometimes eclipse hers. Being his wife meant dimming her own spotlight, and while she adored his brilliance, she refused to live in his shadow. Their divorce was quiet, but painful, and it marked a turning point in her life, not just personally, but artistically. After the split, many in the industry wrote her off. She was too emotional, too independent, too unpredictable. But what they didn't see was the grief she carried, not just over a failed marriage, but over a system that never truly accepted her. She battled depression, quietly. The kind that creeps in backstage between encores. The kind that follows you home after a standing ovation, whispering that maybe you're only loved when you're singing. She never made it a headline, she made it a lyric. And then came the illnesses. For years, Jeannie Seely dealt with chronic health issues that she rarely discussed. The public saw the glittering performer, not the woman backstage in pain, pushing through with injections and rest days replaced by rehearsals. In 2025, she was hospitalized with serious intestinal infections, placed in ICU. It wasn't her first time fighting for her life, but it would be her last. She kept it quiet. No social media announcements, no press releases filled with pity, just quiet resilience. She returned to her radio show, released new music, and hosted Opry nights, right until the very end. She never wanted to be remembered as sick. She wanted to be remembered as present. Even in her final months, she spoke more of gratitude than regret. But those who knew her best, who sat with her in dressing rooms and rode buses through the night, knew the weight she carried. The weight of always being almost famous, of never quite being celebrated the way she should have been. Behind the sequins was scar tissue. Behind the Grammy was grief. Behind Miss Country Soul was a woman who spent a lifetime proving she was more than just a pretty voice. She didn't rise by chance. She rose by design. Jeannie Seely never waited for permission to become who she was meant to be. When the Nashville machine demanded demureness, she gave them grit. When tradition begged for silence, she brought sass. And when the world tried to label her as someone else's muse, she rewrote the script as the author of her own legend. Her reinvention wasn't overnight. It was meticulous, strategic, painstaking. It began in Los Angeles, where she first navigated the undercurrents of a male-dominated music business. She watched how women were used as vessels, pretty faces to sell records written by men, produced by men, controlled by men, and she made a decision. If she was going to make it, it would be on her terms. That decision meant making sacrifices. She turned down contracts that demanded her obedience. She left publishing houses that didn't give her credit. She chose integrity over convenience, which made her a pariah to some and a pioneer to others. But the real transformation came when she stepped into Nashville and decided to break every unwritten rule. She wore short dresses, not for shock value, but because she liked them. She dyed her hair bright, styled it her way. She didn't fit the mold of the soft-spoken Southern belle. She was vibrant, irreverent, alive. And people noticed. When she walked onto the Grand Ole Opry stage in a miniskirt, it wasn't just a fashion choice. It was a cultural earthquake. No woman had ever done that. The institution, steeped in tradition, gasped. Critics called it inappropriate. Fans called it unforgettable. Jeannie called it freeing. And it worked. That boldness became her brand. Miss Country Soul wasn't just a moniker, it was a manifesto. She sang with feeling, but she lived with fire. She didn't just perform country music, she challenged what country music was allowed to be. Behind the scenes, she was just as revolutionary. She produced her own records, a rare feat for women at the time. She wrote for others, often without fanfare, crafting lines that would echo through decades. Anyone who knows what love is, will understand, was one of those. Though it became famous in another voice, it bore her fingerprints. She knew love. She knew pain. She knew how to translate both into melody. And when her marriage to Hank Cochran dissolved, she didn't crumble. She rebuilt. That chapter of her life, once tethered to a more famous man, became fuel. She stopped being the wife of a legendary songwriter and doubled down on being Jeannie Seely, a voice no longer confined to harmony lines. She embraced media in a new way, hosting radio shows, TV appearances, even small acting roles. But more than anything, she leaned into community. She became a mentor, a champion for the next generation of country artists, especially women, teaching them that dignity doesn't mean docility and that strength isn't something you apologize for. Her reinvention extended into her writing. The lyrics got sharper, the themes got braver. She touched on addiction, abandonment, loneliness, empowerment. She refused to write fantasies. She wrote truth, and in doing so, she became an oracle of realness in a genre that often prefers polished myths. But reinvention came with a cost. She was often overlooked for the spotlight. Awards shows forgot her. Press releases minimized her. In a sea of big hats and glittery gowns, Jeannie was a spark plug, small, potent, and impossible to categorize. That scared people. Even as country music expanded to embrace diversity and evolution, Jeannie remained a complicated figure. Too classic for pop crossovers, too progressive for purists, too honest for comfort. She didn't change her message. She just changed the volume. Instead of chasing radio play, she focused on live performance. Instead of mainstream fame, she built a loyal following that spanned generations. Her weekly appearances on the Opry became ritual. Her radio show, Sundays with Seely, became sacred space, where stories mattered and wisdom was passed down like hymns. Through it all, she never pretended. Jeannie aged on stage. She sang through surgeries, grief, disappointments. She never lip-synced, never diluted her story. Every line in her face, every wrinkle in her voice, it all became part of the performance. And that, in the end, was her greatest reinvention. She didn't chase youth. She redefined what it meant to be timeless. In an industry obsessed with beginnings, Jeannie Seely showed us the power of middle chapters, of comebacks without fanfare, of grace that refuses to fade. She didn't fit the narrative, so she wrote her own. The applause was thunderous, the spotlight warm. The sequins shimmered as Jeannie Seely stepped onto the Grand Ole Opry stage. Again. She was no longer a newcomer, no longer a rebel. She was an institution. From the moment Don't Touch Me hit the airwaves in 1966, Jeannie carved out a space no woman had dared to before. The song didn't just win her a Grammy, it gave her something rarer. Control. Her voice was undeniable. Her presence, commanding. By the early 1970s, she had become a fixture in country music. Not a flash in the pan or a novelty act, but a name spoken in reverence. She sang with the legends. She was one. Her influence extended beyond charts and into culture. Country music had evolved because she'd forced it to. She had success. She had respect. She had legacy. And yet, behind all of it, something was breaking. The first cracks appeared not in her voice, but in the way the industry began to move past her. Younger artists came in waves. Trends shifted. Radio programmers sought novelty over nuance. And Jeannie, who never played by the rules, found herself quietly pushed aside, not by scandal, not by failure, but by the soft erosion of relevance. Her style, once daring, was now called dated. Her honesty, once refreshing, became too blunt. And the industry she helped shape seemed content to let her become a footnote. Worse, she was still performing at her best. Even as the spotlight dimmed, she delivered every lyric with lived-in wisdom. The crowd still rose to their feet, but behind the curtain, the offers slowed. The press inquiries stopped. The award invitations thinned. That was the cruelest irony of all. She was forgotten not because she failed, but because she refused to change for a world that kept moving the goalposts. There were other costs, too. Her health began to slip in the shadows. Years of performing, touring, sleepless nights, and endless obligations had left their mark. She underwent surgeries, suffered chronic pain, endured private battles while maintaining a public image of vibrance. She never asked for pity, never leaned into victimhood. But those close to her knew. Jeannie's body was breaking, even as her spirit refused to. Then came the years where she should have been celebrated, truly celebrated. Lifetime Achievement Awards, biopics, national honors. But those calls didn't come. The industry honored her with smiles and polite nods, but rarely with the full weight of recognition she had earned. She kept showing up anyway. At the Opry, she was the soul of the show. Her 397 performances became more than a number. They became her religion. She didn't perform for applause. She performed because it was the only place she felt whole. Her voice, though weathered by time, still cut through the silence like a hymn. Fans, young and old, clung to every word. But even the stage couldn't shield her from the loneliness that crept in between verses. She had no children. Few living family members. Many of her peers had passed. And while she was never truly alone, surrounded by fans, musicians, friends. The kind of intimacy she gave to music didn't always return in kind. She had love in her life, but she also had long stretches of solitude. She didn't speak of regret, but it lingered in the unsung spaces of her later songs. The ones she wrote but never released, the melodies she hummed backstage but never recorded. Still, she poured everything into her final act. Her radio program, Sundays with Seely, became a space of comfort, storytelling, and remembrance. She played the old records, shared anecdotes, laughed with a warmth that made even strangers feel like kin. It was, in a way, her farewell tour, given one Sunday at a time. And then came May 2025. An infection, hospitalization, ICU, silence. For weeks, fans waited for updates that never came. Rumors swirled. But those who knew Jeannie knew she wouldn't want the world to see her suffering. She had always stood tall, even when it hurt to stand. On August 1st, 2025, the news broke. Jeannie Seely had died, 85 years old. Cause? Complications from a severe intestinal infection. The tributes poured in. The Grand Ole Opry dimmed its lights. Artists shared memories. Radio stations played her songs on loop. But to those who had watched her give and give and give to an industry that never fully gave back, the mourning was layered, with grief, with admiration, with guilt. Because she never asked for much, just to be remembered. She didn't go out with a scandal. She didn't vanish in disgrace. She simply faded, like the last note of a perfect song, held just long enough to break your heart. Jeannie Seely's death on August 1st, 2025, didn't make global headlines. There were no front-page tributes, no primetime specials, just a quiet ripple through the world of country music, like the slow toll of a chapel bell no one expected to hear. But that's how she lived. Not to be famous, to be felt. Her legacy isn't carved in gold statues or mainstream fame. It's in every woman who wore what she wanted on stage. In every lyric that dared to say, "This is how I really feel." In every performance that said, "You don't need to be young to matter. You just need to be honest." Jeannie Seely taught us that longevity isn't about chasing relevance. It's about living truthfully, again and again, until the world catches up. Today, her voice still plays, softly but unmistakably, in old records, in radio reruns, in the voices of artists she mentored, who now carry her lessons in every chord they sing. She wasn't forgotten. She was overlooked. And now, as the lights dim and the applause finally stops, what remains is more than music. It's courage. It's defiance. It's grace. In the end, Jeannie Seely didn't become an icon by demanding to be seen. She became one because she never stopped being real.